poverty is a predictor of crime, that black people usually live in poverty, therefore that's why they commit the crime. Is that where, can we agree on that? Does that
That's part
does that make sense? Does
that's
that,
part of the explanation, but I do
it's part
think
of the
that
explanation.
no, I think that they are more likely to commit crimes usually. Have you ever heard of the bell curve?
All right. Hello. Shouldn't be muted.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can. You're rather clear. Have I
Okay.
had you? Am I crazy? Have you been on before? Have we talked before? I feel like I recognize your username.
When would that have been?
I don't know. I distinctly recognize your username though, but doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. That doesn't matter that much. So Second Amendment, hit me with it. Hit me with it. I I was begging for this before I started watching this video. I've been wanting to have this conversation with somebody. So hit me with it. The Second Amendment. Why should we not pass any gun control laws at all from
We
this
already
point
have the
forward?
laws. We have enough laws and restrictions on guns. In fact,
Hmm.
we probably need to repeal some of those restrictions and laws. We need to have better access to guns and more access, not less.
Do you think that we, okay, so are you under the belief that we enforce the laws that we have very well?
I think that there are ways to better enforce the laws that we already have, but I
Hmm.
don't think that we need more laws. Because if we just enforce the laws that we already had, if we just did a better job of that, we don't need more laws. That's the problem. That's like thinking that we need to empower the like institute or agencies like the ATF, to be given more power to go out there and bust people for having firearms.
Right. Okay, so I'm curious. What what gun control regulations would you support? Which ones are you okay with us having?
Just very simple ones. I mean, for instance, you can't let people that are clearly mentally ill to have
Okay.
access to firearms. Okay.
Do you support red
Um,
flag laws then?
red flag laws.
Hmm.
If a person is crazy, sure. If that, I'm not familiar with that. If that just means that a person who's diagnosed schizophrenic doesn't have access to a firearm, then yeah, I support it.
Yeah, so red flag, so red flag laws are not, the way that they're implemented now is usually state by state. And some of the I guess applicable situations vary, but generally when we talk about red flag laws, it is the ability for citizens to report the, I guess, possible danger that somebody poses to not just themselves but to others if they are aware that they are in possession of firearms. So if you know, as a good example, if your neighbor is, you know, if you know that your neighbor has you know, like schizophrenia, as you used as an example, and you're aware that they went out and purchased a firearm, then you could contact the police. They can go and interview and talk to that person, and they would make the assessment on if they would confiscate that person's weapons for a time being, or if, you know, if they didn't see anything suspicious, then they go about their
Mm,
lives.
I would
Um,
rather it be that. No, I don't think that. I don't like that. I think it would be better if you were just prevented from having the gun in the first place. They should probably run some kind of medical background check on you, maybe. But in
so would
general,
you
though,
support universal background checks?
sure, I don't think a lot of people oppose them. I mean, I think, but what I do
I would
oppose,
agree. Most people don't
but
oppose them.
yes, but what people do oppose are, for instance, like the Beto O'Rourke and
Hmm.
Biden doctrine, which is calling for, we're going to take away your guns and stuff like that, or we need an assault rifle ban. And this, it's
Hmm.
like, first of all, the people calling for a so-called assault rifle ban don't even, can they even describe what an assault rifle is? Because it's like the people that have the most vocal opinions on this stuff, when it comes to banning and restrictions and stuff, they don't even really know much about guns.
Right. I can agree with that. There are liberal. There's a lot of liberals who don't know the, I suppose, intricacies or the maybe a better word would be the nuance when it comes to the manufacture and the engineering in terms of firearms. But I want to focus. So besides an assault weapons ban, I want to be really specific. Would you support a ban on AR-15 platforms?
AR-15 what? Say that again?
On the AR-15 as a platform? Because most of the
No,
times
I
when
don't. No,
people
I don't
say,
support.
um, most of the time when people say assault rifles, what they picture in their head is going to be usually anywhere between like an M16 and the civilian model AR-15s. Would you support
No,
an
I'm not supporting
all
it.
out ban on those to civilian sale?
No, no,
Okay.
not at all.
Okay. Uh,
I think that,
so
when it
that.
comes to banning, like, I understand that you can't have everything available, so sure, we shouldn't
Mhm.
allow civilians to have grenade launchers and stuff like
Right.
that. But I don't think AR-15s should not be banned for civilian purchases.
Would you be okay with some restrictions on them?
Well, I mean, no, I mean, not really, because what do you have to really restrict?
Well, there are components that you can install into them that make them fully automatic weapons, which
I think
I
that's
think
already
is
illegal,
a
isn't it?
again.
I think that's already illegal if I remember correctly. I'm not sure though.
I don't know if so the problem with a lot of that is you can usually manufacture different parts, and if it's distinct enough, the law can't catch them, unfortunately. There are things that the firearm industry um, innovates basically to get around the restrictions that we have, specifically because they still want to sell a fully automatic, they still want to market to somebody who wants to have a fully automatic AR-15, but since they can't, they can sell a component, and if that component is if that component is different enough in the engineering sense, then they can kind of skirt around that. Do you think that that's a problem?
No, not really. No, because again, you have to demonstrate for me how this is a problem and how it's
Mm-hmm.
not in line with our constitutional right to bear arms. I just think that at this point it's just like nitpicking because what you're really saying is like, well, the type of people that are into that type of stuff to begin with are usually law-abiding citizens. I think you've like
Right.
the type of people that are like really into for instance, militias and the Second Amendment
The very
types.
tactical stuff.
Yeah, those people are usually not out there breaking the laws or doing mass shootings or any of the stuff that people have a problem with.
Right. So the question becomes for me, when it comes to that, so the issue that a lot of people have when it comes to the AR-15, and it's why you see it a lot, is because, and I'm sure you saw the footage of the shooting in Nashville. It's an incredibly effective weapon to carry out any kind of mass death. Does that? I guess my question is, does that say anything to you, or do you feel like, well, they could have done that massacre with a Glock 19? It doesn't matter. Is that kind of the
I think that there would have been just as many. I mean, I don't know how many deaths. It's like I can't tell you what would have happened if they used different weapons, but
mm-hmm.
it's conceivable that they could have caused just as much damage anyway. So why ban? It's a tool, right? You don't blame the car when somebody gets into a car accident. If they're drunk or something, like if they're impaired, and that's kind of what that is. It's like an impaired person had access to firearms and went on a killing spree.
Right, but so the issue I have when people say that guns are tools, what is the primary tool, or I guess the primary use case for a gun?
Ensuring liberty.
Which means
I'd say just standing back, standing by.
which means
I don't know what you. Why'd you just tell me like what you're driving at here?
well, no, I'm genuinely asking, because that, like, you say ensure liberty, but okay, how do you ensure liberty with a gun?
Well, I think a lot of people just, for instance, find them cool, or it's like you
Hey,
like
I
someone's
respect that.
gonna.
Hey, look. I respect the approach, or the understand or just the approach of like guns are cool. I like guns. I have I'm building a samurai edge from Resident Evil, if you know what that is. Like I love John Wick movies. I've always grown like I come from a police family. I don't have a problem with guns. My issue is the ease of access that a lot of people have in this country. And I said it earlier, there's a cost tied to that. There's a cost tied to how armed our society is, you know?
Right. Well, I think the trade-off is one that I'm willing to deal with because, like I said, the
Mm-hmm.
people that the vast majority of gun owners and gun hobbyists, those people are not out there doing the types of things that make the leftist liberal side call for gun grabbing. And the interesting thing about it is because it's like you have the people that are calling for the gun grabbing, right? But these are
Mm-hmm.
the same people that are like fuck the cops and all this stuff and ACAB, and
Well,
it's
yeah,
like
obviously, fuck the
okay,
police coming straight from the underground. Yeah.
okay, but then it's like okay, so you have that thought in your head, but then you also have the other thought that we need to get these guns out of people's hands. It's like, well, who do you think takes the guns away?
What do you mean? Who do you think takes the guns away? We don't take guns away right now.
Hypothetically speaking, like who would do the gun grabbing?
Probably police, because that's who we have
So,
to enforce laws.
so fuck the police, but let's have them go out there and take away people's rights to bear arms.
Right. So, okay, if we're talking about like the ACAP, so if we're talking about police, the relationship that the police have to the neighborhoods that they, you know, police. I don't know why I couldn't think of the word. That is kind of a different conversation. I'm willing to have it, but I want to stick with the guns really quickly, just because what I fail to understand is this is there seems to always be this I guess this idea of I guess you're trying to point out hypocrisy, but I'm not sure what the hypocrisy is. I want changes
No, I'm not
in
trying to point out.
police
I'm not trying to point out
in the
hypocrisy.
relationship that police have, but
Um, it's
I
not hypocrisy
also
that I'm trying
want
to
less
point out.
guns on the street.
I'm trying to point out that the people calling for this stuff haven't even
Hmm.
thought it out completely. They don't even have a clear idea of what they're talking about when it comes to guns, and they haven't even thought about what that would entail, like in practice. So that's kind of the issue that I have with calling for gun grabbing. Why don't how about
Well,
instead of all the energy that all these politicians and activist people that are part of all these NGOs and such, instead of calling for banning this gun or this and that, why not just advocate for better like mental health treatment or something for the crazy people, like the person who went in Tennessee, because a lot of that stuff, they haven't even released the manifesto, so I wonder why that is. But you know that aside, I think that if you look at the individuals who carry out these acts, they're usually complete psychos, and so
to
you
a
have
degree,
this. Yeah.
there's an element of mental illness with a lot of these, but that's not a universal motivating factor for even all mass shooters. There's a number of mass shooters who they're not, they might be sociopaths, they might be narcissists, they might be antisocial, but they're not, they're of sound mind. They
Well,
planned
I've
out,
seen
they
a
like
lot of.
even the person who carried out the Nashville shooting, as far as we know, they planned that out, they prepared for that. It seems like there was a motive. We don't know what the motivating factor was to that, but they seem to be at least in
Yeah.
moderate, well-minded capacity to go in and pass a background check.
Well, that's the interesting thing. I don't know why they don't release the manifesto. Yeah, I have
I'm
my
sure we'll hear
suspicions.
about it eventually.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to read it just because you know it's good
Well,
for
I
us.
think
It's good for us to know. Good for us to know that sort of thing.
Well, yeah, because I think it's it reflects the violent pathology of the far left gender ideology. But I guess that would be a different conversation.
I
But
mean,
man,
Right. Yeah. I mean that would be a very different conversation. So are you aware of like the Sandy Hook shooting? I think it was like 20 people dead or something, a bunch of them
Well,
small
yeah,
children.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Well,
So
I've heard conflicting things about that. I don't know how many people were actually killed. I mean,
I don't remember the exact number.
I don't
It's
even know if
been
people.
a
Well, I
decade,
don't
I
even know
think.
if people were killed. To be honest, I haven't seen the
Really?
evidence for it.
What do you mean you haven't seen the evidence?
I mean, I've just seen, I've seen the so-called evidence for it, but I was following that story when it happened, and
Mm-hmm.
there's some very interesting discrepancies there,
What
and I
seemed
think,
shady to you?
yeah, I think there was good like journalists and reporters, like Infowars, that were early on the scene when it came to covering that story, and they pointed out some very interesting gaps in the narrative.
What's the narrative? There was a shooter. They shot some people. A lot of them
Yeah,
kids.
but if you saw the some of the pictures of the people that were there, right, that were
Mm-hmm.
victims or and such,
Right.
they were also photographed in different places at the same, like at a different shooting, for example.
Mm. Really?
Yeah.
So
So
so they
what happens
were
a lot of the time is
crisis
that they'll.
actors.
Yeah, yeah, you're familiar with that. Yeah.
I
So a
mean,
lot of the time.
I've heard it, but I've never seen it demonstrated.
You know,
That's not really.
you got to do your research on that one. That's too much for me to explain right now.
I mean, I, I'm not. I'll be honest with you. I'm not going to dive into that. Just because that's been pretty what's the word, refuted. The whole crisis actor stuff. Jones even comes out and says that he didn't he doesn't really believe
Well, he
any of
sold
that
out,
stuff.
so he sold
Well,
out. That
you
was
can look at
the
it as
old allowance
selling
was
out,
way
or
better.
he was selling out earlier. It kind of just depends on how you look at it.
No, because they got to him. I think that they got to him. They had like too much on him, and so he had to kind of walk back some of the things that he like originally discovered.
So who's they?
The media censorship apparatus,
Which is
the constellation of large media entities,
such as.
CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, take your pick,
So
NPR.
so so what did they do exactly? Did they shake
They
down
all went in
Jones?
on, for the most part, they all went in on defaming Alex Jones and casting him in a bad light.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, he did go out there and say that a bunch of kids didn't die when they died.
And by the way, he owned Piers Morgan back in the day about on the topic of guns. If you've ever seen that, I don't know if you've seen that clip before.
I feel like I have, because was isn't that the I think I know I'm pretty sure I've seen the clip you're talking about.
That's the one where he tells Piers that 1776 will commence again.
Yeah. Yeah, I have seen that. Oh, dude, that dude's a psychopath. But hey, he makes a lot of money. So,
No, dude, he was right because Piers Morgan's like some British guy, and he's like, "You Americans have to do what we would tell you to," and Jones is out there like, "We fucked you up back in the 1776, and we'll teach you again." So like he showed him what was up, and like, Piers Morgan ran away with his tail between his legs.
I mean, Pierce Morgan, I'm not going to defend Pierce Morgan. He's not really a defensible person, at least from my view. But
Well, that's interesting because he used to have a lot of opinions that lined up with the far left. And nowadays, it's a bit different because he's basically stayed the same that he was like 10 years ago. But it's like the left has gone so far left that, like, even people like Bill Maher and Piers Morgan get canceled by the same people that they cultivated. It's an interesting thing to observe over time.
well, you understand that in terms of political, I suppose one could say in terms of the Overton window, or what is politically permitted to people, you're going to always throughout time kind of see any ideological group shift one way or another. We've seen the right shift incredibly far right. Same with we've seen the far left see a larger upswing in their representation as well. It's kind of always happens,
Well,
always does
I
happen.
liken it to something like Frankenstein's monster. You know, you create this thing that goes out of your control.
Interesting. So once again, I gotta ask, what is the so you're comfortable with the trade off of the amount of gun deaths we have in the United States?
Well,
To get back on
most of
topic.
the deaths from via guns are from, you know, handguns, not even AR-15s and the type of weapons that you know, the
Right.
advocacy groups on your side typically want to go after. It's actually,
Hmm.
you know, for
Let me
like
be clear. I have
self.
disagreements with those people in the way that they approach their gun conversations. Um, but yeah, I mean, yes, this is true. Most deaths are due to handguns. Most deaths in in America due to guns are suicides.
Yeah, so I
A
think
pretty large, I think it's plurality. I don't know if it's a majority, but I'm pretty sure it's a plurality. Is due to suicides.
right. So, you know, I think that if these people want to be taken seriously before you know, conversation even begins, they have to stop warping statistics to fit their narratives. So, you know, it's very, you know, your side doesn't usually admit that, for example, you know,
What, the suicide half of it?
or yeah, or that, you know, handguns are responsible for most of the deaths, for example.
Right. So in my issue, so let me explain my position. Let me explain my position so that we're not, because you've mentioned the left, you've mentioned my side a lot. So let me let me detangle myself from the rest of my peers over here on the left. I am a supporter of a certain list of gun restrictions. You know, nothing. I'm not a person who wants a ban or a mandatory buyback program. Although I am okay, I am permissible of a voluntary buyback program, one that would allow gun owners to make a, I think, fair profit on their guns. I think that if we are going to incentivize people turn in their firearms to the government, that we should at the very least offer them a, you know, probably above market value what they, you know, paid for their firearm to begin with. After that, I want a national registry so that we can track and keep an eye and know where and how many guns there are floating around in the United States. With that, I also want universal background checks. Other than that, I think there's one more. I can't really remember, but those are like my three big ones. Do you have any problems with any of those? Are those, because I find that I get painted by a lot of people who come in like yourself and in my comment section and characterize me as somebody who wants to ban all guns. I'm a gun owner. I like gun safety. I want people to be safe, and I want people who are capable of being safe with those firearms to have them. I got no problem with that. But we do need, at the end of the day, the way I see it is our relationship with guns is costing us too many lives, in my opinion. And I think we need to ring in a few of, you know, we need to put a few more stop gaps to stop some of these people. It's not going to eliminate it. We're never going to get rid of gun violence as long as there's guns in the country at all. As long as we have an armed populace, there is no gun deaths in America. But we can reduce that number and we can get it down to a more comfortable number.
Well,
Does
hang
that
on,
seem reasonable
let
to
me
you?
ask you something.
Go ahead.
Sure, okay. Let me ask you something. How do you stop a bad guy with a gun?
How do you stop a bad guy with a gun?
Yeah, how do you stop a bad guy who's out there with a gun?
Well, it kind of depends. Uh, so unfortunately, when we're talking about, you know, if we're talking about bad guys with guns, there's
Wrong.
quite a lot
Listen,
of
easy,
factors. No, no, no.
easy.
Hear me out. Stop, stop, stop. Give me a second. This is important because stopping a bad guy with a gun is not the everyday and not a realistic scenario. We don't stand in rooms and somebody draws on us and we either can or cannot draw. Many times, especially if we're talking about bad guys with guns, We're talking about people getting the drop on you. We're talking about people who are more well armed and ready for any kind of shootout or whatever it might be. Plain and simple, nobody, even if you have a firearm, on average, is going to be ready to stop that person in a reasonable manner. We've seen it before. There was that one guy, I think it was at a mall, where some shooter entered into the mall, started popping off, and the dude had, I don't know what kind of handgun he had, probably had a Glock or something. But he got good shots off, and he ended up killing the guy. That can happen, but I don't think it's likely, and I don't think it's the majority of our experiences with firearms in terms of the public. Go ahead.
The correct answer was a good guy with a gun. Now, I'll explain to you why that is.
So,
Okay,
police?
what happens is if you have a maniac out there who's, shooting a bunch of people like the Tennessee shooter, you got to have a good person with a gun go in there and stop them, right? You can't just send a social worker into the building like the left wants to. You got to have somebody that's armed with the gun and go in there and take them out. So, just I guess you didn't know that before, but now you do.
Well, okay. So you're standing in line at the self checkout in the grocery store. You're ringing up your bananas, your pasta, your carton of eggs. Somebody, you're concealed carry. You have your license, everything else. Somebody walks into the room with I'll just say a Glock 19. Starts firing. Do you want to know what's most likely going to happen to you as a gun owner?
Enlighten me.
You're going to get shot because you're ringing up eggs right now. And your back is to that person.
Okay, but now imagine if more citizens had access to guns and were able to, carry them where they want to. Now, would that have happened if everybody in the store had a gun?
Well, first of all, that's not a deterrent for that person entering in to shoot anybody. They're probably already aware of that. Meaning that the first, I don't know, 5, 6, however many shots they can get off, those people are still dead. We haven't really meaningfully stopped the problem. We've reduced it certainly a bit, but we haven't solved the problem yet, have we? And also, do you know any police officers by any chance?
I know that they don't like it when people use their Second Amendment right to defend themselves.
Okay. Would you like to know why that is? Why that's an issue?
They don't know who the bad guy is when they arrive on the scene.
Exactly. The more guns in a scenario where a shooter walks into, we'll continue using the grocery store example, and begins to fire upon people. If everybody in that checkout line is a concealed carry, license whatever, I think that's the term, and decides that they're going to fire back at the shooter, there are going to be stray bullets flying all over the place. Some people are not going to be able to respond properly to that violence. Guns are, and I know movies lie to us about this, incredibly loud. A firearm going off anywhere near you in a public space is going to disorient you before you can do anything. And these are, again, I make this point, civilians. These aren't armed officers who have been trained to respond to firearms going off. These are regular people buying eggs, buying bananas, and suddenly a loud goes off, and then another. And the expectation and the assumption that more people are going to be capable of drawing and accurately taking out a shooter. Meanwhile, the entire room is flooded with gunshots. most of those people aren't going to be able to hear, aren't going to be able to see. They're all going to be incredibly disoriented. It's why having one security officer is preferred in those scenarios. It's why police also like it.
I think what you're getting at, what you're trying to say is that we need to not only have access for all of those people to have concealed carry permits and access to firearms, we also need to train them, is what you're saying. So I can kind of agree with that, because then they would be trained in a combat situation.
Right.
But
And I do think that minimum training should be required. You have to go through a whole process to learn how to drive a car. I don't think it's unreasonable to require people to get training to own and operate firearms. I think that's reasonable.
what if now, I think I saw a chatter point out that the main reason for the Second Amendment is to fight the tyrannical government, which I would actually
Mm-hmm.
agree with, because our government is increasingly more tyrannical, especially if you saw like the Twitter files and like you paid in like the Snowden stuff and the stuff that Julian Assange revealed, is that like the government is basically like using the big corporations to like enforce their will, because that's one way that they can circumvent the Constitution. And if you notice that liberals and the left are very like, they think that they're so clever when they say something like, well, it's a private corporation. If you don't like it, blah, blah, blah. But now it's interesting because the government is actually using the big corporations to enforce their will. Now that's been demonstrated multiple times already. So that's why that retort
Such
doesn't work.
as. So also, I want to point out, and I'm not going to go any farther than this, because the tyrannical government point to me is, and you'll forgive me for this, fucking stupid. Do you know what happens if the United States government turns tyrannical and, you try to arm yourself? You know what's going to happen?
A portion of the military would join actual patriots in fighting back.
Yeah, you're going to get drone strike. That's what's going to happen. The United States government has quite a few extra resources than any regular citizen.
So now, your argument is that you think that
my argument is that it's unrealistic. That's my argument. It's unrealistic.
I don't think the majority of the military would even like, they would break off, because there would be a portion of the military that would say, hell no, we're not going to fight against American citizens, and they would join the patriot side versus like the tyrannical left government.
Mm-hmm. So again, the resources that the United States government owns is widely what's the word, more equipped to counter any kind of militia, whatever. And even then, what we're describing, what we're both talking about here, is essentially a civil war, to which point, again, whoever has control of drones, of the military industrial complex, is going to be who wins out the day, not who has better AR-15s along with everything else.
Won a war in like several decades now.
Well, still, we don't. What wars have we fought? What, Iraq? To which case we entered into a space which we weren't familiar with. I don't really want to spend time on this, because we're going to continue to kind of run around this like tyrannical government. Oh, we can fight them, and I'm going to continue to say the U.S. government has more resources and will out-weapon you every single time. Like an AR-15 is not going to save you from a drone. That's just factual. I can't really, there's nothing more I can really say.
I think the scenario that you're describing isn't very, I don't think you've thought it through too much. It's like, my point is that I don't even think that it wouldn't just be like the American government versus like a bunch of rednecks with guns. You'd have, portions of, our military personnel joining in with the Second Amendment militia types and stuff to fight the tyranny of the government, because they would see what's going on. So you have to anticipate that factor. You can't just say, well, the military has jets and drones and stuff.
Well, yeah,
that doesn't win you a war.
They are jets and drones, and they do have a pretty good capacity to track all of us, thanks to the Patriot Act.
It's even better to be armed to provide some form of resistance rather than none. Wouldn't you think so?
Well, so again, this is so here's the thing. The problem I have with this argument is that we're assuming and we're buying into quite a lot of things already that have already happened.
Well,
We're
the government's
already
already
starting
tyrannical, so I
from
think
tyrannical
it's
government. We're already starting from a lot of different points. But
well, the
something I want
government's
to
already
actually ask,
tyrannical anyway.
something I actually want to ask, which you mentioned earlier in the lead up to this part of the conversation. You said that the government is um, basically employing private companies, private institutions to reinforce or push their will onto us. Can you
That's been
explain?
proven.
Can
That's
you
not my
explain that?
opinion.
Yeah, can you explain that? From a
Okay,
leftist, we believe, and I'm okay with speaking for the left on this. We believe that the relationship is that of private corporations and private institutions lobbying the government to pretty much put in favor or to write laws in their favor or write laws that will not regulate their business interests more than what they are comfortable with. Do
no,
you?
see, I think that the leftists are too simplistic in their thinking. They think that the big company with the big money, they pay but I mean, that's kind of like that's too simple, right? So for instance, if we take somebody like Jeff Bezos and we look at Amazon, now Amazon has a lot of its uh research and development tied up with government contracts to provide military technology, such as like, facial recognition software and things like that, and other sort of they're involved militarily. I mean, if you look at um, other things such as like just recently with the Twitter files, you saw that the government agencies were dictating to Twitter, what kind of information should be disseminated and such. I think it's very clear that the government and big corporate, it's not like the corporations just own the government flat out. Like they're kind of just intertwined at this point. But in
So,
these specific scenarios,
quick question. There is polling out there that will validate the opinion that the American people broadly support some pretty basic gun control laws. They don't get passed. Why is that? Why is it that the American people hold opinions, advocate for those opinions, vote for politicians on the grounds that they will push for policies that they agree with, and it never happens?
you have to be specific as to what exactly you want. What do you mean?
Well, we
But we still have the
Biden,
like we still do have the Constitution, right?
yeah,
Like whether you,
mm-hmm,
very very inconvenient for the government that we do have some semblance of constitutional laws that enshrine certain rights, and it's not just
right,
easy to take it away, no matter what the popular will is.
that
What
is
if the
true.
popular will was to make black people slaves
Well,
again?
the popular will is not a ban on guns. The popular will is common sense gun reform. That's what the popular will is. Universal background checks. There's a pretty decent support of red flag laws, and I believe a national registry. I haven't seen the numbers on national registry, but at the
I
very
know
least,
I don't know how
universal
extensive
background
the
checks
national registry,
is
but
something that the American people broadly, a majority of Americans, a large swath of Republicans even, have support for. Why have we not passed it? The only
well, a lot
people
of
who
those
would benefit
Republicans are.
from that not passing are
It
gun
depends on which
manufacturers, right?
Republicans you're referring to, because a lot of the Republicans are like rhinos, basically. Like,
They're
there's
Republican. They're still Republican Party voters. I'm not talking about politicians. I'm talking about voters.
okay.
Gun owners also poll very positively in terms of gun control, certain gun control measures. There are things that we as a society, I think we all kind of agree on. You said it earlier. People who are schizophrenic, people who have serious mental health issues, probably should
Well, yeah, I
not be
agree.
allowed to own those firearms. I think
Like,
there's really um, reasonable checks we can put on.
yeah,
But I
but I
find that there's the
I don't think
conversation always turns into like this person in chat where I get, or again, we end up having this conversation about no guns or all the guns. It's somewhere in between. Like we
no, I
can
mean,
have
I
some
would more or less
guns.
agree, but I don't. For instance, I don't think that like the transgender uh, fanatics should have access to weapons, and I think that if you propose that, then
And why
the
not?
left will go insane.
And why
Why
not?
not?
Yeah.
Because it would be solid happiness.
What do trans people do that that other people don't that would disqualify them from owning firearms?
I just think it's an example of mental illness. So we could,
Are you a
you know,
doctor?
uh, no.
Are
Do
you
I
a
need to be a doctor?
psychiatrist?
I
Well,
think it was classified as mental illness at one point, and due to political
this is true.
reasons, it no longer is.
Well, yeah, we have a deeper understanding of the phenomenon of transgenderism. That's true.
Well, I mean, that's okay. If I say that I'm a lion, all of a sudden, I mean, that's how I identify. And if you don't respect that, you're a bigot. I mean, I don't think that I don't think that that's fair. But
I mean, there are people who are furries who identify as
that's a mental
that.
illness as well.
Being a furry,
Yeah, if you
what's
think you're an
the
animal,
what's the damaging part of that? I've seen people who are furries who wear their whole getup and work registers before.
well,
Seems like we can accommodate it.
I think
So,
no, I think if you think that if you're a human that thinks you're a dog and you have sex with dogs, I think you
well, people
don't.
don't think they're dogs the same way trans people don't think they're the opposite sex. They just prefer to identify under the opposite gender that they were born under.
Um, no, I don't know. Like I said, I think that the mental illness aspect should bar you from having access to firearms. That includes furries, transgenders, and stuff like that.
Well, I find it really interesting that the only gun control that you're advocating for is gun control for, let's be honest here, leftists, people of a left wing ideology. Do you kind of see how I haven't called for ideological bans, but you're calling for ideological bans on guns. You're actually being more tyrannical than I am.
Well, that's interesting that you say that because normally the left doesn't claim furries, but if you want to if you guys want to claim them yeah, feel free. That's gonna do my side more of a favor, so you guys can have the furries and the trans people and such.
I mean,
But
as long as they can own firearms the same way any law abiding citizen of the United States
well, I mean, that's where I
can, then
differ from like most libertarian types is that I don't think that like, oh yeah, like everybody should just have access to guns. I don't think that at all, but I think that I think like the way the conversation is skewed, it doesn't take into account like, yeah, like we probably shouldn't allow access to weaponry for people who don't know what body they're in. I don't think that yeah, it's like very common sense stuff. This is the type of stuff you would have said like 5, 10 years ago, and nobody would bat an eye. But now it's considered like controversial to say, yeah, this person who spent 40 years of their life being a guy that now thinks they're a woman. Yeah, I don't know if we should trust them around children or firearms. That's just my view.
well, why not? We allow women around kids. What's wrong with what's the issue? I fail to see the issue.
Biological. Yeah, we do allow.
Again, we're now like kind of off the conversation of guns, which is fine. But again, we can both recognize that you're actually being a little bit more discerning about who can own guns than I am.
Well, no, I admitted that fact. I mean, I do. Like I said, I'm not like a libertarian necessarily. I do think that there are certain people that should have access to firearms and certain people that shouldn't. So in a sense, I do kind of agree with you. It's just that we're kind of disagreeing on, like the left would say, like, oh, the white males shouldn't own guns, and I'm saying that they should.
Well, tell me why. Overwhelmingly, white males commit, I think, I don't know about a majority, but a pretty large amount of the gun crime, or at the very least of the mass shootings in this country.
Well, for now, the white males are, whites in general are still, luckily, the majority in this country.
Right.
But
So
that
why
just
shouldn't we
changed.
ban you all from owning guns?
Well, you can't. You don't have that power yet. I know that you guys want that power,
Well,
but
no, but I mean, we talked about you mentioned that people who are trans people shouldn't be allowed to, because they have
well,
a
that's my opinion. That's just
predisposition.
my view. Nobody's going to enact that into law, at least not at this point. But I
Well,
think that
actually, there are people who are trying to enact that into law in some
well, we'll see if
states.
they succeed. I think that it is. I mean, maybe the Tennessee
Is that
shooter is the
tyrannical?
first. But I think that when it comes to that, the Tennessee shooter might be the first in a long string of brand motivated killings. I mean, that's why they're
So it could
hesitant to
so
release the manifesto.
right. So it could be that could be true, but under that framework. white people, and I'm just going to say white people broadly, shouldn't have access to guns.
No,
White
I don't
people
think
are
so
too
because I
mentally
think that
ill
you're
to handle
forgetting who
firearms.
commits most of the gun violence in the country when it comes. If you want to bring I mean, the chatter did bring that up, but that is true that 13% of the population does commit 50% of violent crime, and if you look at the
Is that
demography of
violent
that,
crime, gun violence?
yes, well, violent crime in general, that could be either rape,
That could
murder,
be a lot of things, yeah.
right, but there's a
But if
lot
we're
of things
talking
that
about gun
are categorized.
ownership, white people
A lot of things that are
overwhelmingly own
categorized
more
under
guns. So again,
there's a lot of things that are categorized under violent crime, but if you look at the disparity in the statistics, I mean, you'll see that blacks make up a larger percentage of violent crime offenders,
do you
even
think
when
there's a reason for
adjusted.
that?
Well, that's interesting. You're going to say, oh, it's because of poverty, but even when adjusted for income levels, for some reason, even more well-to-do Black Americans tend to be more violent than their wealthier white counterparts. So I don't know if the argument that it's just their impoverished areas produce more crime, while that may
Well,
be
we can
true.
well that is true. We can track the biggest predictor of crime is poverty.
Yes, but even when adjusted for income levels and such,
Well, income levels isn't the same as if you started out in a higher income level, maybe. Actually, if you start out in a higher income level, there's a good chance that you're not going to be you're not going to run to violence. But if you've moved into that income level, then you still were brought up in that environment.
yeah, but I think that even still, like even if you are not born into that environment, there still seems to be a propensity for violent behavior that has been observed and documented, even by the FBI, which the left loves, I thought. So, you should trust that as a source, probably. I,
I
I
mean,
don't
the
always
FBI has
trust them.
good statistical
Yeah, they have to.
data.
They compile this. They do compile these
Mm-hmm.
statistics
Yeah.
for a reason. It's interesting that the left doesn't. The left usually calls bullshit on those statistics because they don't fit the narrative that they like. When they, of course, believe the FBI on everything else, usually. So I don't know.
You mean the left who has mentioned multiple times that oh damn, now I'm forgetting his name now. Uh yeah, I can't remember his name now. The FBI killed him. Someone with an F. Fuck, I can't
You
remember.
mean David Koresh and the Branch Davidians? Or I believe that was, yes, the FBI under the direction of Democrat Janet Reno, and of course there was Ruby Ridge, and there's been a lot of oversteps by the federal agencies when targeting gun owners. Actually, that's perfect. That segues right back into the original
Well, yeah,
topic.
the only time that gun control has ever been talked about, especially in California, a lot of those gun reforms in California got put in place because black people picked up guns. That's kind of a pretty
Yeah, but I think,
standard.
but the left always uses that argument where it's like, oh, they went after the Black Panthers. When, dude? Like 60 years ago? Like the
Well,
left is
no,
not
this was
just
in the
here.
'80s.
What's
Well,
that?
actually, no. Reagan was when the fuck was Reagan governor? I don't actually remember what.
He was governor of California, I think, in the 60s.
I want to. Yeah, that might have been the '60s. Reagan governor. Fuck. God damn, I can't spell. Governor. Let's see. Governor of California. Late '60s, early '70s. Left office in '75. Entered in '67. So basically mid '60s to mid '70s.
Well, I'm not really a fan of Reagan either, because Reagan, like I said, like he. Well, actually, I didn't mention this before, but it doesn't matter because Reagan. There's a lot of the problems that we have nowadays kind of stem from Reagan, and that's where the rhinos get their original ideology from. That's the root of the neocons and stuff.
Yeah, they
So
fucking love Reagan.
who does?
The neocons.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But a lot of the left love the neocons now, like Liz Cheney and stuff, and David Frum.
Yeah, they're liberals. They're cringy liberals who you know who will what's the word rehabilitate George W. Bush. Yeah, it's a thing. It's
You
a
should
thing that
look into
happens.
you got to look into paleoconservatism. It's way better.
I think I've heard the term before. I don't know what exactly I've definitely heard the term. I couldn't describe it for you. It seems to always be kind of a shifting term in terms of its.
Paleoconservatism is that's the best kind. It- yeah, oh man, you just gotta look into it. You'll stop being a leftist once you find out more about it.
I feel like I've heard that before, and every time I've read any kind of conservative stuff, I don't exactly move too far right. So again, what's the you know, we've veered off of guns. So what's the so do we not have a problem with guns in this country? Is that the
Yeah, but if you think that there's a problem with guns, then you're gonna have to be honest about who's doing most of the crime. So that
mm-hmm.
circles back to, okay, well, what do we do about crime? And then of course your side says, well, ACAB. So then we can't do anything about crime, and then the cycle
Wait, what
perpetuates.
do you think ACAB means? What do you think ACAB means from a political in terms of political policy?
I mean, you're gonna have to have some group of people out there, you
Right.
know, dealing with criminals. So
Would you like to
I
know
think
what the leftist prescription is for crime?
yeah, send in a social worker to bust
Well,
the
no.
drug dealers.
No, it's community policing.
Community.
It's
Okay, so like militia
it's
groups then.
localizing. No. It's localizing your police force. The problem that we have in a lot of big cities, which is usually where you see a lot of crime, right? You see a lot of crime in big cities, large populations. You're going to see a big concentration of crime there, right? The reason why the police have a negative relationship with those communities is because they don't live in those communities. A lot of times, police live in suburbs that are outside of the area in which they police, and they are then driving into any, this or that neighborhood to police it as kind of an invading force to a degree. They are a group of people who are there to police, but they don't know any of the locals. They don't, they don't go over to any of these
Yeah,
people's
I've heard
houses.
of this.
They don't do any of these things, and
I've heard
because
of
of
this
that
concept.
relationship, because of that
I've heard of this
relationship,
concept before, but I think
yeah. I mean,
you know,
if you ever been to a small town and they have their local sheriff, they don't have the same kind of problems with, with the police that
yeah, but you have to look
they
at the
do now. Because
demography.
go ahead.
You're ignoring the demography of these examples. So the
Mm-hmm.
sheriff and in the small town where he knows everybody, like they're not going to have those issues, But if it's like even if you're like,
Why wouldn't they have? Well, they wouldn't have the issues because they live in the community.
yeah, but it's like even if you had but if you had like, for instance, the worst ghettos, if you introduced community policing there where the cops had to live in those areas, they would just get killed probably.
It wouldn't really be that they have to live in those areas. The police that are already hired wouldn't be forced to move there. You would preferably hire people from within the community that want to be police officers and try to what's the word? Basically source your employment of police officers from the neighborhoods that they're going to be policing.
I can
The
tell you right
closer
now,
relationship that you have to to any officer. If you've ever I don't know if you've ever lived if you've ever lived in a neighborhood where you had an officer who lived a couple houses down from you, if they're the person who's, policing your neighborhood, you have a good, they know you, you have a good relation with them. They're not scared of you. They see you and they see their neighbor, not that they go into this neighborhood of complete unknown people and they don't know, they don't know you. They don't know if you're dangerous. They don't know if you're not dangerous. They don't know anything. These police who go into these neighborhoods go in without any kind of social grounding. And because of that, they overreact. And because we have, because we don't have, you mentioned you took the jab at like social workers, but talk to any police officer. They don't like responding to these interpersonal or mental health crises. They're not equipped for it. They're not given the proper training. They're not given the proper tools. They're bereft of the ability to serve and protect. A social worker is better in that case of, any kind of mental illness situations or any of those, because that person is ready to approach that person. They know how to deal with them running around or them, flailing or them like not knowing where they are. Police only have a few tools, those being
So should they have sent
tasers
that
or
social
guns.
worker into that building in Tennessee?
Well, no, that person was armed. You would send police. Nobody's
Okay.
arguing. Nobody's arguing that you send social workers into armed conflicts. But absolutely, when there's somebody who's having a mental health crisis, probably sending a social worker accompanied by an officer wouldn't be the worst thing. Because if it escalates, you have the cop right there to keep it in line. And if it doesn't, there's not the hasty assumption that somebody is dangerous, might have a gun, might have a knife. And then there's an unnecessary killing by the police, which is what upsets people. People are upset because of the unnecessary death that comes from police interactions sometimes.
Well, this guy in the chat says that he's from the Netherlands, and they kind of have what you're describing, and that those police get beat up a lot of the time too. And I think if you also, it's interesting because if you look at the demographics of the Netherlands, I think you are seeing a lot of importing of people from countries that are not the Netherlands, where and as a result, you have an uptick of crime. So again, this all tied, stems from problems with immigration and demographics as well. And I would like to see that discussion play out a bit more when it comes to the people that, because a lot of these leftist discussions around crime always typically leave out who's committing the most crime. And I think that there has to be an honest conversation there, because you know the left oftentimes demonizes white people and stuff, and says, well, we need a racial reckoning, basically. And okay, I mean, if you want it, let's have an honest discussion, and let's talk about the ways in which certain other groups are also ruining the country, for lack of a better term. It's like, it's not just, it can't just be white people. Like, let's take a look at how every race is doing certain negative things, and maybe we can have an honest conversation from there.
Do you find it interesting that I went on an entire thing talking about the relationship that police have to the neighborhoods that they operate in, and the more interpersonal conflicts that we could try to avoid through better policing? And now, as a retort, you've brought in race, immigration, all the rest of this stuff.
Well,
Do you find it kind of
yeah,
a
well, I
bit
mean,
odd that that's
I don't think that that's unusual at all. I think that that's a part of the recipe, right? You have all the different ingredients that produce a result, and I think that that's one of them. But nobody chooses to talk about it.
to talk about what the race of people who commit crime?
Yeah, I mean, you find that it's usually in this country, for example, it's American blacks, but this guy's talking about how he lives in the Netherlands, and it's usually Moroccans.
So Moroccans being immigrants who probably live in not necessarily poverty, but probably a lower standard of living,
Well,
which
does being
would
poor
kind of track.
excuse you? Does being poor give me the excuse to stab you for
Well,
your
no, but so if we're talking on an interpersonal level, being poor does not excuse you from breaking the law and from committing crime. But being poor can explain to us what the impacts of poverty are on society broadly. This is the difference between a micro and a macro example. Crime, crime as a statistic, as a phenomena that happens in society, we can find out what factors are going to predict higher crime rates. Individual crime is usually interpersonal. It's usually interpersonal conflicts. But everyone has interpersonal conflicts.
lack of fathers in the home, which again is, for Black Americans, that is actually a big issue that even the leaders of their community have vocalized.
Yeah, that is a thing that Black communities do struggle with, but that doesn't. That is probably a predictor of possible crime. I don't know specifically, but I would guess that not having both your parents in the house probably isn't good for your social development.
Well, so
But
would it be okay for me to say, hey, Black people, you guys need to do a little better?
well, do you think Black people are the only people who don't have fathers in the homes?
Um, that's, but
Do you
we're
think? Do you
talking
think?
about
Do you
we're talking
think
about
out there?
proportionality.
Do you think in the United States there is a family of a son and a mother and a father who abandoned them, and all the people in the scenario are white, and that child committed crime.
It's just it's not that just because there's no father in the home doesn't mean that your kid is going to automatically become a criminal. It just means that that's
It's a
just an
predictor, though, right?
indicator. It's like the
Regardless of race, right?
correlation does not equal causation. That is true. But at the same time, if we look, okay, like what's the problem in this community, for example? Okay, there seems to be a lot of poverty, a lot of criminal activity, and also a lack of father figures, right?
Well, can we
So
understand that
just
the criminality is a result of the poverty?
I'm
We
not saying that
understand
it's
that.
and I don't know if it's necessarily the result of it because you see other poor, like for instance, poverty. Like, how come different communities react differently to certain types of like to poverty
Mm-hmm.
in different contexts, right? So, for example, you saw even in the United States, right? The Dust Bowl, for example, like the shanty towns and stuff. Well, I mean, you've probably read The Grapes of Wrath, I'm sure. Now, that was a those are poor people, right? How come you didn't see them
Well, that's
committing
also fiction.
crimes?
The Grapes of Wrath is fiction.
You understand what it's based on, though, right?
Sure, but again, it's fiction.
It's
Also,
not
I
that
didn't.
that
Also, I
aspect of
didn't.
it is not fiction.
Admittedly, I didn't read Grapes of Wrath. I think when I was in high school, we read Gatsby.
Okay,
We
you
had
know it's
two
about the
options.
dust. You don't
Yeah,
you
yeah, I
know
know it's
about
about
the
the Dust
Dust
Bowl.
Bowl.
It's
You
a
know about like
fictionalized
the people
story
that
about
were
the Dust Bowl. Yeah.
you know about the people that were traveling with their families across the country and they settled
Yep.
in these areas
Mm-hmm.
trying to get work and stuff like that. Now, how come they were poor, but they weren't known for criminality, right? Despite the fact that their conditions are probably even worse than a lot of the American ghettos where there's a high concentration of black people, for example, right?
How would you know
And
that there's criminality if you're moving into an area that literally wasn't a part of the United States? We literally didn't have government out there.
what?
How would you be able to track
What
that?
do you mean?
Well,
You
you
did
said
the
that.
Dust
Well,
Bowl took
wait, wait,
place.
wait.
We did have a
You said
federal
that. Wait, wait. You
we did
said
have a
that
federal government
people.
at the time that this happened. I don't know
Yeah,
what
yeah,
you're
yeah,
asking.
yeah. But during the Dust Bowl, did we have? From what I understand, there weren't exactly police all over the place in the Dust Bowl, were there?
There's still police and stuff. What do you mean? The presence of police will not produce more crime anyway. So I don't even know what that has to do with it.
Why wouldn't it?
I don't know. We just get to the point. What are you trying to say?
Well, no, 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 no. That's my point. If there aren't police around, then yeah, you can pretty easily front the idea that there's no criminal behavior in your community, in your whatever. You need somebody to report that crime for it to manifest in like I don't I, if the sheriff wasn't there back then, guess what? You didn't commit a crime because nobody knew it happened.
I think maybe you aren't familiar with when the Dust Bowl took place. Maybe that's the block here.
Remind me again. I read Gatsby, so my Dust Bowl memory is quite
This would
dusty.
be the early 20th century. There were yes, people. This did happen in the continental United
I'm
States,
trying
and
to
there
think.
was a federal government and
I thought the
everything.
Dust Bowl was
I
back in the like
don't know what you're saying.
1800s. It's been a while. I thought the Dust Bowl was in the 1800s, but I could be wrong.
Okay, no, but that's whatever. Okay, so we settled
Can we
that.
can we can we can we use a contemporary example, please?
A contemporary, sure. I mean, if you even look at the impoverished like white neighborhoods,
Mm-hmm.
say the Appalachian region,
Mm-hmm.
I think you'll see that there's not like drive-by shootings. I mean, that's simple. I don't even have to really delve too deeply into statistics.
The 1 second actually, because I want to see something. The Appalachian region. Where is? Let's see. Stop. Stop. Where would you describe Appalachia? West Virginia?
Well, you're looking at a map of it right now, aren't you?
I am currently looking at a map, yes. It's about, I'm just trying to pick a state because technically that's also Virginia. Let's see. Can I just get a raw number really quick? Number of crimes, 6,000. I just want. Huntington, West Virginia. Crime situation in town where 25% of the residents live below the poverty
I
level.
guarantee you there's more crime in Compton, California than there
Whoa,
is.
whoa, whoa, wait. So here's the question: do you think there's more crime per capita or just more crime raw numbers?
There's going to be more crime per capita because, like you said, the amount of people that live there, right?
Right.
But again, nobody ever looks at the racial makeup, and that's the missing ingredient. See, it's not just, oh, there's more people, so there's more crime. Well, who are the people?
So, so what you're saying is that poverty is a predictor of crime. That black people usually live in poverty, therefore that's why they commit the crime. Is that where? Can we agree on that? Does that does
That's
that make
part.
does that make sense? Does
That's
that
part of the explanation, but I do
It's part
think
of the
that
explanation
no, I think that they are more likely to commit crimes usually.
because why?
There's been
What's the
very
predictor?
you this requires a much larger conversation. But if you have you ever heard of the bell curve?
I have heard about the bell curve, yes.
Okay, well, you got to read it because it does kind of go into things about like IQ and race and how that how that manifests itself in crime and such.
Do you think IQ as a measuring what's the word I'm looking for? As a measuring metric could have something to do with one's environment? Do you find that a lot of people who are in poor areas have, on average, lower IQ scores compared to those in more wealthy areas?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I guess like I said, that's why you have to read because they do research on and actually do delve into the question that you pose.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not a
What
guy.
what's the Did they come to a conclusion on that?
Well, I think it's more so that like again, like if you're saying like, well, just poverty means low IQs and such, then okay, but how do you control for the factor of say, you know, poor white people still for some strange reason having higher IQs on average than poor counterparts of other races. Now, that's not to say that if you're like a different race, you're stupid or you're not. That's just
You
to
know,
say that there tend to be biological differences that I
mm-hmm.
think can be reconciled. Actually, I don't think that that means we have to bring back segregation or you
So
know.
they're environmental then.
Yeah, but that part of it comes with changing the culture. For example, you got to pull your pants up and stop talking in ebonics and get a job application. A
You
lot of
know,
people
it's
don't want to
funny.
hear that.
It's funny. I've heard quite a lot of people, white people, in fact, not pull their pants up and talk in ebonics, and they do pretty damn well for themselves.
Well, I think I don't like those people very much either. I think they should also pull their pants up and get a
Right, but
job.
it seems like their identity as a white person didn't hinder them when it comes to getting a job or gaining success. Now, did it?
Usually it will. I think that you'll be hard pressed to find many. Are we allowed to say wiggers on Twitch? Is that
Probably. I guess we'll find out if I get a notification.
okay? Well, I just know that it's not the word you're not supposed to say. But anyway, I
Right.
don't see a lot of them in very meaningful positions of employment usually.
I mean, you ever heard of Riff Raff? Justin Bieber, even?
Those are famous pop artists and musicians,
Sure,
right?
but have you never met somebody who kind of acts that way, but still does perfectly fine?
No, not usually. They're usually
Not
outside of
usually.
7-Eleven asking me for $1 before I go inside.
Hmm. Interesting. It'd be
But
interesting to see
I
the.
gotta go. Yeah, this I did follow you, and I'd like to continue this conversation, but I do have to get going because it's been talking for a while. But I think we
Mm-hmm.
covered some good ground. Ultimately, I think you know you were right sometimes. I was right most of the time, but that's
Mm.
just how it
Very
is.
gracious of you.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that that's why these conversations are useful. But anyway, have a good day, and maybe we can continue this conversation another time.
Yeah, you do the same.
All right, bye.
Okay. Well, that was a lot, now wasn't it? Oh, Jesus Christ. Yeah, we quickly got off the topic of guns after a certain point. It's kind of it's kind of funny. Like, you talk about, whenever talking about guns or any of these conversations, I find that suddenly we start talking about race and a bunch of other weird shit as if black people own most of the guns, but whatever. Let me check in with chat. I haven't. You know the thing. The thing that they tell, like at the end of all YouTube videos where they tell you to like click on one of these like things to watch more videos. Yeah, I've been meaning to film one of those. So that's what I was doing. I was just setting it up to film one.